The cliff effect on our nation's financial picture is in the headlines everywhere this month. While Congress negotiates the hard details, many other forces and voices are weighing in on just how damaging it would be to get to the edge. Good evening, I'm Doug Price, and this is Colorado Quarterly for December 2012. Tonight, this group of Colorado public servants is ready to talk about the fiscal cliff, the deficit, and what it'll mean in Colorado. Our former governor, Dick Lamm, is on the state steering committee of the Campaign to Fix the Debt, the message machine of Senator Alan Simpson and Erskine Bowles. Joining him on that committee is Norma Anderson, a former legislator who served for many years and has the distinction of being the first woman to serve as majority leader of both houses of the Colorado General Assembly. We also welcome Andrew Romanoff, who was Colorado's Speaker of the House from 2005 to 2008, and Shawn Mitchell, who has served in both the House and Senate, where he is today ending his term of office. I'll begin by stipulating that we are taping on Monday, December 3rd, and since there's every possibility that the situation will change by Friday night, we are speaking in the context of the Sunday exchanges in the media. Just as a starting place, Governor Lamm, what did you hear over the weekend that sounded promising or discouraging?
I think it was mostly discouraging. I think that deep in the DNA of both political parties are sort of against the basic to the compromise, the Republicans on taxes, the Democrats on entitlement cuts. I just don't see how it gets put together, but I hope it does.
Well, I'm going to say thanks for that beginning just the same. And I think of tonight as a chance to define this fiscal cliff and walk through the top three elements: tax rates, sequestration, and the debt. As a Baltimore mayor once said, Kurt Schmoke, who I was with at a session with, he said, "Everything's been said, but it hasn't been said by me." And to our audience, that may feel that way to you, but as the four of you know, I would prefer to defer to Benjamin Disraeli when he said, "The most successful man is the man with the most information." So our goal tonight is to provide that information to our audience first off. Andrew, start us off with an explanation of what the cliff is about.
Sure. You know, some folks have compared this scene to the point in Thelma and Louise where the two main characters drive off a cliff. This reminds me a little bit more, though, of the scene in Blazing Saddles, where the governor sends an African-American sheriff to the town of Rockridge, a town filled by racists who all then point their gun at him as soon as he announces his appointment. And the sheriff very ingeniously grabs a gun and points it at his own head and manages to get off the stage by threatening to pull the trigger. So this is, in many ways, a situation that Congress has brought upon itself on purpose as a way to goad action that seemed to escape members of both chambers in the months, the years leading up to this point. If Congress does nothing, then a series of spending cuts and tax increases will take place. Beginning in January, the country will revert to the rates at which Americans were taxed under the Clinton administration, effectively wiping out the Bush-era tax cuts. And a series of fairly draconian cuts will be made to spending as well.
Do you have a real quick sense of what the national impact is going to be? Then I'll defer to Shawn for the local impact.
I think most economists have suggested that the combination of tax increases and spending cuts could well throw the country back into recession, imperiling what has been a fairly fragile recovery. Certainly the stock markets won't like it. Many employers may be forced to lay off folks, and people themselves could see a significant hit on their own paychecks.
Shawn, you've had a chance to be more current in terms of what the local impact might be. Give us a sense of what this means in Colorado if the cliff is breached, so to speak.
Sure. Let me start local and then try and back up and add a little bit of my perspective to the fiscal challenge we face. Locally, it would mean about $68 million to the state budget, which in a $20 billion budget, that's a relatively small amount, but it's not spread out evenly. It will hit some areas harder than others. There will be $30 million, a little over $30 million that come out of K-12 education, but K-12 education is already funded over $8 billion. So still, it's a relatively small total impact. The greater impact to the state than the 68, 70 million that will hit the state budget is the rest of federal spending in Colorado. We have, of course, the Federal Center, we have military installations, defense contractors, and cuts in those areas will also impact the Colorado economy.
And I think that all five of us can agree the worst cut would be the 10% that would come to my federal funding for Rocky Mountain PBS. So
that would be outrageous.
So that we're clear we can't do that. Dick and Norma, ever since Alan Simpson and Erskine Bowles finished their Simpson Bowles plan, they've been touting it to Congress and the nation. They formed the campaign to fix the debt and asked the two of you to be part of this state steering committee, which is one of a handful right now. Norma, tell us what you hope to accomplish.
Well, the biggest issue is make the public aware as well as Congress. Congress is aware of their problems. They just haven't solved them. If you put enough pressure on them through the public, through ads, et cetera, I mean, run a campaign. And it is fix the debt, because it's foolish if they don't.
Talk a little bit about why you were inspired to attack the debt. I mean, you've got a distinguished career. There's many things you can do. This is a big national issue. Why were you attracted to this?
I got the call and said, would I co-chair with Governor Lamm? And I said, absolutely. I didn't hesitate a bit, because not for myself. It isn't going to hurt me. But it will my children and my grandchildren. I have a son that is involved in 2 businesses. I have a son in Texas that has 8 kids. You know, I think about those children growing up. They won't have what we had.
So let's segue slightly and let's begin to think about what the public as a whole is thinking, so that it sets up the context for the solutions we want to talk about. Our journalist team from Colorado State of Mind, Steve Mort and Mary McCarthy, went to Larimer Square in the past week and heard a lot of pessimism about what is ahead among the voters they stopped to talk with. Let's roll that clip.
I would say I would like to see tax decreases. I'd like to see the free market be able to exercise its volatility a little bit more. I don't even think that was the right word, but I think the free market, if allowed to go unchecked, would do a much better job than continuing governmental regulations and tax breaks for rich and yada, yada, yada.
I personally don't think that Congress, number one, has the ability to work together to do anything about it. And number two, if they did, I don't think it would really have an impact on the day-to-day lives of middle-class Americans.
I think it is fair to say we're disproportionately impacted because we do have a large amount of federal spending in this state. We are, as you say, heavy in defense, both military bases and defense contractors. We also are the regional headquarters for Region 8 of all federal departments, so we have a large federal payroll here, and that doesn't take into account the programs that are funded with federal money as well.
I think it's going to be a big stroke to the economy to have taxes rise and expenditures not fall over the next months or years. It's going to be a terrible blow to the economy.
I think it's that top-down that everyone's afraid of, right? I think there's going to be compromise. I do. You know, I'm the hopeless romantic, though, so I think there will be compromise. I think everyone knows the results of if there isn't. So I think they'll find a way.
Andrew, you're the one that's probably at the table right now the most identified with the progressive movement. When you think about where this came from, what happened, give us a sense of the philosophies that underpin where we are today and how you would begin to think about solutions based on a progressive agenda. It may not be fair, but at least cover that perspective.
Sure. Well, it strikes me that Congress put itself in this position largely because of the intransigence that particularly the Republican majority in the House demonstrated. You know, the president has been forced largely to negotiate with himself. He had laid out a series of proposals to bring down the deficit and balance the budget over time. And has asked Republicans to show their cards, which they've been unwilling to do. Even Governor Romney, during the course of the last campaign, was asked to explain the math that might produce a balanced budget on top of tax cuts and increases in defense spending. And of course, he couldn't do the math and suggested that he'd be happy to share the details after the election. So look, I'm not one who's ever believed that one party has all the answers. I think that's arrogant. But it seems to me if we can depoliticize this debate by an appeal to the numbers, it would be much easier to solve. You know, this show is being taped, as you pointed out, on Monday. Perhaps by Friday we'll hear the Republican plan for spending cuts. So far, we haven't heard one.
Well, let me ask Shawn to weigh. Let me keep Shawn from weighing in. Shawn, go ahead and weigh in and give that sort of the countervailing point.
Sure. Well, in the interest of depoliticizing, here's some equal time. Candidate Obama promised to cut the deficit in half, and he knew he was inheriting a tough economy. The last year of Bush's presidency, there was like a 20% bump up in federal spending for a rescue fund, the stimulus fund. But what the president did was incorporate that 20% into the budget permanently going forward. And rather than cutting the deficit in half, he's actually made it bigger than all past presidents. He's added 50% to the total accumulated debt history of the total debt of the United States. And then when he was asked, what's your solution to our terrible deficits and our growing debt, he created a commission, the Bowles-Simpson Commission. And I'm delighted to hear that the governor and that Norma are pushing the basic outline of that commission, because the president has held it at arm's length. He never took any of their proposals seriously. He didn't adopt anything. And then the same senator who had declared that raising the debt ceiling was unpatriotic, as president, demanded that the debt ceiling be raised without any strings or conditions.
So rather than relitigating the election, thank you for that. I do think that some level of passionate restatement of where you are is valuable. But let me
give a passionate restatement. You know, I mean, we've only balanced 8 budgets since 1935. I mean, we got a much bigger problem here. It isn't a matter of Democrat or Republican. Neither party can balance the budget, and so we have a debt that is so astronomical that I don't think that it's almost within democratic means to be able to solve it. My political platform is, you know, over the next 20 years, so you don't do anything suddenly, but we're going to have to raise taxes and cut benefits, and we're going to have to do it almost year after year.
Well, let's go ahead. I think it's a good time to pivot to that. To figure out what we agree on. I think that first off, does everybody agree that we're going to be in a place where taxes are raised and spending is cut?
I need to interrupt.
Go ahead.
It doesn't have to be taxes raised, but it does take new revenue.
Okay.
I mean, that tax code is so huge. I mean, not even a Philadelphia lawyer can understand it anymore. So.
Well, we have 3 lawyers. Are you a lawyer?
No, but
okay.
I'm innocent.
Thanks a lot.
But what you have to do is get rid of a lot of the deductions, or put caps on them. Like, why should somebody that has a second home be able to take that mortgage? They shouldn't. That's an example.
Well, let's make sure we consolidate what Norma just said. So what we are looking at, and OECD will tell us that our stated tax rates are very high in the United States. However, our tax collections are very low in the United States. If you look at the taxes on corporate income, we're in the bottom half. Taxes on personal income, OECD countries were in the bottom half. Total revenue as a percentage of GDP, we're 32nd out of 34 countries in the OECD. Only Chile and Mexico have lower tax collections than we do as a percentage of GDP. So what you're saying is that it's not necessarily a tax rate issue, it's a tax collection issue. So let's focus on what are some of the things we should do, tax collection and expense cutting. Shawn, what are the things you'd go after?
I want to underscore and agree with one thing that Norma just said, that it's more important that we generate more revenues than that we raise tax rates. One of the ways we can raise revenues is by eliminating complicated deductions, but another one is just by encouraging a healthy economy. After Ronald Reagan, after John Kennedy, and after Calvin Coolidge lowered tax rates, the economy was stimulated, economic investments, projects picked up, and more revenues flowed to the government. So no, we aren't all at the same place where we agree that rates have to be raised. Deductions can be eliminated, the economy can be encouraged and unleashed, and the American free enterprise system can do what it's done throughout our nation's history, which is fuel our economy.
Let me go to we're borrowing 41 cents out of every federal dollar we spend. That just isn't going to be a matter of raising additional revenue. We're going to have to raise tax rates. We're going to have to dramatically cut entitlements. We're going to have to do everything that the political process hates to do, but we're going to have to do it.
Let me make sure, again, this is fun, by the way, but let's make sure that we go back to Bowles-Simpson as our baseline. In Bowles-Simpson, you do have a diminishment of the tax rates, but an increase in the tax collections through the closing of loopholes. Let's make sure, are we all agreed on the revenue increase issue? Question mark.
As opposed to tax rate increases?
Well, I don't think it's,
no.
we do agree we need to get revenue.
yeah.
That's on the table for all four of you.
Absolutely.
And then do we agree that spending is too high?
Oh,
Andrew.
absolutely.
I'll go to Andrew and
Yeah,
make sure.
I think Governor Lamm is right that Americans have not been asked to pay for the benefits they enjoy. Not been asked, in other words, to do the heavy lifting and make some tough choices. You know, there were signs outside of some of the protests at when the president's health care plan was going through it, rallies that said, "Get government out of my Medicare." So there's pretty clearly a disconnect between what people say they want, which is lower taxes and less government, and some of the programs provided by government and funded by taxes that they seem to enjoy. And it's very easy, I think, for politicians of both parties to run for office by promising to cut taxes as low as they possibly can and supply programs as far as the eye can see and just hope that nobody will do the math before the election. Pretty easy way to get elected, pretty lousy way to govern.
Well, let's start by thinking about specific things we do. As I said at the beginning when I talked to you guys, my goal is to make sure Shawn and Andrew can never run for office because I'm going to get them on record for anything that ever happened.
The voters beat you to the punch.
So, Norma, Shawn, Republican perspective, what are the things that you think we have to do with less of or without?
You have to, if you look at the Bowles-Simpson, it's a balanced approach of cutting everything, not only the entitlements. Medicare has to be on the table. Medicaid has to be on the table. Social Security, you have to raise the age on that. Again, I'm sorry. And a lot of the other programs, there's programs there that this country could do without very easily. Sure, they're small, but boy, you know, I found every dollar adds up to another dollar and another and another, and pretty soon you're talking about real money.
Has Everett Dirksen,
Yes,
Everett Dirksen
he did.
Anderson here.
Yes, he did.
Can I jump on that? There's sort of two big categories. One is the entitlement budget, the universal programs that are paid out regardless of how wealthy or poor the person is. As Norman just pointed out, those have to be tamed. We need to slow the rate of increase. We might have to means test them. And more prosperous seniors won't be entitled to full Medicare coverage, full Social Security benefits. They don't need it. But then there's another smaller category of the budget that's important too. We need to get rid of a lot of the pork programs, agricultural subsidies, corporate welfare, crony grants to bundlers for the president, and the billions of dollars that the federal government speculatively dishes into the economy. We need the government to take care of its citizens and let free enterprise take care of free enterprise.
You know, Willie Sutton once was asked, why do you rob banks? And he said, because that's where, supposedly said, because that's where the money is. So while it's easy to rail against entitlements in general, we ought to be focusing, as Governor Lamm and others have done, on what's driving the growth in spending, which to a large extent is the cost of health care. To some extent, as a matter of choice. Medicine has produced lots and lots of new services and technology that lots of people want. Population's older and getting more expensive to serve. It's pretty clear, as the president's plan lays out, that there are ways to reduce the rate of increase in spending in healthcare, which will go a long way, I think, towards helping balance both the state and the federal budget.
We are demographically quite healthy. But I do think the idea that we have a younger population than most of our Western European competitors is true. The effectiveness of our health care is really the great problem.
He's absolutely right. But we transfer $30,000 on an average to every person over 65 in the United States. That's $14,000 an average Social Security check, the rest in Medicare and Medicaid. And there's 10,000 baby boomers a day that are retiring. I mean, it's just demographic insanity here that we're heading into. So I really believe that, and Andrew is right to bring up health care, because if we would pay OECD rates, you mentioned OECD, if we would pay the same percentage as OECD does for their health care, all of our problems, they don't all disappear, but they sure are minimized.
Again, interesting, you know, the statistics help to inform us. If you look at the OECD countries, government outlays as a percentage of GDP in the United States are in the lower quartile, 27th out of 32. Countries like Estonia, Korea, Switzerland below us. And that includes our expenditure on military. Shawn, let me ask you, I mean, this is a state that's blessed with great military bases, but let's talk a little bit about the military as a component, because we basically spend more as a single country than the rest of the OECD combined. Is that practical long term, and should we go after that?
Well, that's a tough one. It probably isn't practical long term, but you recall the world becoming a pretty scary and unpredictable place. For example, in the Carter years, when we thought we could reduce the defense budget and American stature and influence was reduced around the globe, and things got pretty ragged. Ronald Reagan fortified the defense budget and won the Cold War and reestablished American strength and influence in the world. So it's not a simple thing to say reduce the defense budget and all will be well, because the world could catch fire while you're doing that.
Doug, those statistics don't include the accrued liabilities. I mean, that shows spending. So we say that that's $16.2 trillion, but it's really $80 to $90 trillion, which is 5 or 6 times our GDP.
And things like Medicare.
Yeah, I want to make sure that we. I want to make sure we do that for the the information.
Black lung disease, veterans benefits, all of these. Government keeps their books like Enron keeps its books. You know, we've got to accrue liabilities, and so those figures don't begin to tell what Norma brought up. What kind of burden are we leaving our kids?
And I appreciate that. It's just for purposes of comparative, I don't think that Estonia is also including its deferred liabilities. They may have few of them. So I'm just saying from a comparison standpoint, let's make sure that we're using some reliable numbers in order to set a baseline so that we know where we are. We all, as we said, what's the old line, that every politician wanted to be born in a log cabin he built by hand himself. I think sometimes we all go, oh, we're going to cut taxes, increase spending on education, and be more efficient in government. Well, you can't, you know, faster, better, cheaper, you can have 2 of the 3 at one time. What are the things we have to get to?
Well, and you have to look at business and give them insurance that you're doing something for them to spend. I mean, they're sitting on money right now. Why? Yeah. They're afraid to spend. They're afraid of what's going on. And they're not hiring like they would be in a good economy.
Things like too many regulations, Obamacare making employment too expensive. Employers are afraid to risk the investment of hiring people.
We disagree on some of the effects, obviously, here, but I do want to echo a point that Shawn made earlier. Although it doesn't solve all the problem, in some ways, the best way to advance a balanced budget is to grow the economy. I'm not suggesting it's a panacea. But if we were able to agree, as Congress has not, on the sorts of measures that boost employment and increase revenue, some of these problems become a little easier.
I'm going to use an arcane term, dynamic scoring. I'm assuming none of you, dynamic scoring is when you say, if we grow the economy, we're going to cut the deficit, therefore we can have a tax increase and all that. None of you are supporting dynamic scoring? Okay.
Well, actually, I do support dynamic scoring in the sense of I don't think that tax cuts should be counted dollar for dollar against future revenues you're estimating the government will get. Anything that you do that encourages economic activity, that encourages employers to feel safe, to invest, to hire people, will bring in more revenue.
This is a really interesting point, and it came up a lot in our debates in the legislature. It may not sound as interesting to folks outside the legislature, but the model that you're suggesting, which a number of colleagues and I tried to persuade the Office of Legislative Counsel to introduce, would allow the magical pink sheets of paper, the fiscal notes, the estimates, to include the economic consequences of proposals. The trouble, as our economists point out, is this is not a controlled experiment. Very difficult to say this policy lever is itself solely responsible for all the sorts of changes you're likely to see in employer behavior.
Sort of like social welfare bonds that are difficult to, in theory useful but difficult to measure. Let me ask us to make a pivot, because I do think that we've had a spirited conversation, but a desire that we share to get to a point where there's a solution. Politically, how do we get from where we are today, which feels a little bit like an impasse, to a solution in the near term?
Can I just add one additional thing? It's the fiscal cliff. Because once we get by this first stage, we not the fiscal cliff, but we've got the raising of the debt limit. So we're going to get into February, and we're going to have to raise the debt limit and relive all these issues over again.
Well, it's not just a cliff; it's a valley of fiscal death. It sounds like it's continual.
It's the Disraeli comment again, as I've Disraeli on the brain, where he said that the most unwise strategy is to consider leaping a chasm with 2 steps.
Yeah. I need to echo something the governor said, which in fact, we're not really facing a fiscal cliff. We're facing sort of a pre-planned adjustment, some spending cuts and some tax increases. The real fiscal cliff is that we're spending far more than we're taking in, and pretty soon we won't be able to pay our bills. This so-called fiscal cliff is just a deal to try and reconcile the budget.
Let me challenge you a bit on that, because that's part of my job. It's popular to say we have a spending problem, and I can accept that we do. But we also probably have a tax collection problem, in the sense that if you compare us to other economies, we don't spend quite as much as most, but we don't collect nearly as much as they do. So let's make sure that we think about this as spending and collection at the same time.
I think that's a fair point. And traditionally, the American economy and the American government has spent less as a percentage of the economy than the European social democracies. That has made us a more prosperous society, not a less prosperous society. Right now, the trend is to have government expand and grow and spend at European levels, and that's causing our problems.
Well, there's another piece of the collection problem, which is, first, not everybody's paying what they owe, and second, as I think Senator Anderson was pointing out, the current tax structure provides an incentive to hire an army of lawyers and accountants so that you can avoid paying your fair share. That can't be the right incentive. You asked earlier, Doug, about the politics. They change a bit in January, part of this calculation, because at that point, the votes Congress take will be on whether or not to cut taxes and restore some of the rates.
Well, let me go to, with a couple minutes left, let me go to Dick and Norma, who are in the process of campaigning to fix the debt, and get a sense from you of the steps you'd like to see taken in the next 20 days.
Well, I think that what our whole effort is to try to get a grassroots movement to try to back the political process to make some of the hard decisions that are necessary. That would be the way I would view it. Norma?
And of course I agree with the governor, because they need to both sides to give. I haven't seen, now I have seen the speaker say we accept more revenue. The $250,000 has to be negotiable if you're going to look at small business, because most small business pay personal taxes they don't incorporate. I think it's like 70%.
There's something important to fit in here, which is the president ran for re-election on a promise of a balanced approach, spending cuts and revenue increases. Now he's made his proposal to Congress, and it's all tax increases. He wants to raise taxes on the wealthy. There are not serious cuts in it, and in fact, even the tax increases are only a small part of our annual deficit.
Is it fair to say it's his opening bid, not his final bid?
Well, that may be, but I wonder if he'll get anywhere close to Erskine, to the Bowles-Simpson Commission. Andrew, would you recommend that the president endorse Simpson-Bowles?
If everybody would take Simpson-Bowles, it would help our problem immensely.
How about you?
I think Simpson-Bowles is a useful starting point, but I'll tell you this, the president's plan does include spending cuts and tax increases. You're right, the president has emphasized the fact that the Republicans are holding hostage these negotiations and their desire to shield the top 2% of Americans from the tax increases that would otherwise come.
We've run out of time for this Colorado Quarterly in December 2012. Thank you to Dick Lamm and Andrew Romanoff, and to Shawn Mitchell and Norma Anderson. Thank you for tuning in and for your support of Rocky Mountain PBS. I'm President and CEO Doug Price. Good night.